One common question that I get asked all the time is what makes front-end development hard? Before answering any question, it is always wise to think through why a particular question is being asked. Most commonly, this question is asked by someone who only has basic level understanding of programming in general and assumes that front-end should be similar to the programming 101 course that is traditionally taught in universities and wonders why front-end needs additional special attention. So let's dive into that. Let's think through what is software programming in general. The first thing that you have to think about in software programming is the environment. This would be something like .NET or JVM or Python or Node. Your choice of environment is going to limit your choice of the programming languages that you can use. For example, it would either be something like C# or Java or Python or JavaScript. The next thing that you have to think about are the APIs. There will be some that will be provided by the host environment, for example for basic file access, HTTP requests and such. Next, there will probably be an ecosystem of APIs around, either in the form of commercial libraries or open source solutions that have significant traction. Finally, there will be most likely some domain-specific code within your organization and even within the particular project that you are working on that you might need to familiarize yourself with. Now that we are on the same page, let's examine what a traditional solution to a programming challenge looks like in the backend world. First, you pick an environment. Let's say we pick JVM. Next, you pick up programming languages. For this case, we'll go with Java. Next, you need to learn the APIs, for example, the Java runtime, along with some framework, for example, Spring Boot, and then you work your way around the existing organization code. As you can see that this isn't particularly far off from what most people have always understood to be the task of software programming in general. Now there are lots of other concerns that you need to think about, for example, your data storage solution and its backup. However, for most common data collection applications out there, the data storage solution will be pretty simple table or an object database. And you will most likely be offloading the server upkeep task to an existing team within your organization. Nevertheless, we can put them under a deployment bucket. Now that we're on the same page in terms of backend programming and programming in general, let's examine what a traditional solution to a programming challenge in the front-end world looks like. As always, first you need to select an environment. One issue here is that there isn't one environment, there are multiple. And these environments are ever changing, and when you might be inflicted with a new version of an environment is not something that is under your control. The best way to cater for this is to be cautious of the libraries you might see in the wild and learn to recognize things that look brittle and might change in the future. Next, you need to pick a programming language. Sadly, here too, the task will be compounded as you will need to be familiar with JavaScript. You might think that you don't need to be familiar with JavaScript as you might be using something that transpiles to JavaScript. However, sooner or later, you will need to understand your transpiled output or JavaScript in some other library. So an intricate understanding of JavaScript is pretty much essential. Next, you will need to learn HTML and perhaps even its flavors like Angular templates or JSX. Finally, you need to understand CSS. Once again, you might think that you can get around it by using CSS in JS or some pre-baked CSS framework, but you need to realize that they too are essentially just CSS concepts, only better isolated so they don't have leaky side effects. Learning CSS is not optional. Next, you will need to familiarize yourself with a few APIs. First and foremost will be the browser JavaScript APIs like fetch, promise, query selector, how to do a string replace, etc. Next, you will most likely spend quite a bit of time with a particular framework that aims to iron out the browser inconsistencies for you. Unlike backend frameworks, the front-end frameworks are ever changing, a few more than others. How often you will need to re-understand a framework will depend upon two things: how much the framework takes on. If it takes on a lot of responsibilities, for example Angular, then you might be mostly in an ever state of recursion. If a framework does one thing and one thing well, then you will be in a lot less churn. However, it will not be zero, as you will still need to keep it up to date. This is simply a reflection of the fact that browsers are ever changing and frameworks need to iterate in order to keep up or utilize new runtime and development performance opportunities. Finally, you will still have to understand existing solutions to a particular problem offered within your organization's existing codebase. Now, there are still lots of other concerns that you need to think about, for example, UI deployments, domains, CDNs. However, for most common applications out there, you will most likely be offloading the server upkeep to an existing team in your organization or a hosting provider. Nevertheless, just like backend, we can put them under a deployment bucket. There are also other things that you need to think about as a front-end developer. One of them is design. In addition to the inputs and outputs of your code, you need to ensure that there is a visual coherence in how your application looks and feels. Modern component-based design makes this easier, but if your atoms are wrong, or if you have leaky margins or the wrong level of component abstractions, you will never get a perfect user experience. Wrong abstractions can exist in backend code as well. However, sadly, wrong UI component abstractions have a very obvious UX degradation. Then you also need to think about accessibility. This mostly means that when you use tricks to make things visually behave as a designer might request, you will need to provide screen reader alternatives. So in short, it's a simple math of scales. The amount of knowledge you need to have before you can be a basic productive front-end developer is simply greater than the number of concerns you need to deal with as a beginner backend engineer. As always, I've been Basret. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please share it around and don't forget to like and subscribe.